Welcome back. President Trump's 2018 budget proposal has sparked fierce debate on Capitol Hill, where even some Republicans are balking at the level of so-called spending cuts. It is actually a slowdown in the growth of spending, not spending cuts. But my next guest maintains that lawmakers are resorting to Washington speak by calling them cuts. Joining us right now is the Director of the Office of Management and Budget, Mick Mulvaney. Director Mulvaney, good to see you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Maria, thanks very much for having me again.
Walk through the budget for us and tell us what's most important here.
Sure. We take care of taxpayers first. Well, actually, we do something different. We look at both sides of the equation. I think for too long the focus in Washington has been on the impact of on the folks who receive benefits, and no one has been paying attention to the folks who actually pay for the taxes. So for the first time in recent memory, we approached this budget like this. We went line by line through the programs and said, look, can we defend that program with, say, that outcome to the folks who are paying for it? We found programs, for example, in the Department of Education that were 6% effective. 6% is a failing grade. We found that in the LIHEAP program, one of the low-income programs for folks in colder areas of the country, that 11,000 dead people are getting the benefit. That's no longer defensible. And when you go through a budget with the perspective of the folks who pay for the government, this is the type of result that you get, and I think it's entirely defensible and, in fact, admirable.
But this is all so the reason that the left is criticizing you and criticizing this budget. They're basically saying, look, you're cutting things like food stamps, cutting things like, Medicaid. So what do you say to them who, you look at like an MSNBC, the anchors across the board basically saying that this is for the rich? And go ahead.
A couple things to say to that, and I think writ large, one of the messages is if you're at home and you pay taxes, the Democrats don't care about you. They're completely dismissing you as part of this analysis. When we talk about cuts, however, we talk about slashing programs, etc. The language that the left and much of the media, not all of the media, has used the last couple of days. Keep in mind that in Washington, D.C., and I am not making this up, Maria, if we spent $100 on a program last year and $104 on that same program this year, they will call that a cut because the Congressional Budget Office says you're supposed to spend $106 this year. So when you actually spend more, there are folks in this town who again and again will tell you that's a cut, and that's just disingenuous. That's Washington speak. It's not ordinary English, and it's part of that disconnect between the voters and the people who represent them.
Well, it is dishonest to call it cuts when we know it's an actual pullback in the growth of spending over the years. But you've even got the pushback from Republicans, right, Director? I mean, Senator John McCain called it dead on arrival. Senator Lindsey Graham said that, he said, quote, it doesn't stand a snowball's chance in hell.
I had a great conversation with Senator Leahy, who I don't know very well, but I think may have been in the Congress longer than I've been alive. And he called me up and he said, don't worry, young man, yours is no more dead on arrival or less than every other presidential budget ever. Keep in mind, we are obligated by the Congressional Budget Act of 1974 to offer a budget. It is a vision document. It is a top-line messaging document. What is that message? We're taking care of taxpayers. We are funding this president's priorities that he ran on. That's more money for national defense, more money for border security, more money for school choice, more money for veterans, more money for law enforcement, without adding to the deficit this year. That's the message we delivered to the Congress in our budget. They may choose to get there in another way, and that's fine. We'll have that discussion during the summer. But it doesn't surprise me that the many members of both parties want to write their own budget.
And one of the issues some people have a problem with are the expectations of growth of 3%. Because they're saying, look, we've seen the GDP numbers. We just got a GDP of up 0.7% for the first quarter. I know the first quarter has seasonality issues. However, how do you come up with the 3% expectation and use that as the potential partly to pay for this?
Sure. It's a great question. Happy to answer it. We took a look at the Congressional Budget Office projections, which is 1.9%. In fact, Maria, it's 1.9% forever. That's what the Congressional Budget Office and most Democrats will tell you is the best we can do.
Yeah.
That's it. That's the future. We refuse to accept that in the Trump administration.
Yeah, well, they haven't seen 3% in 10 years.
That's right. If you're 30 years old, you've never worked in an American economy growing at 3%, and we need to change that. But here's how we did it. We looked at the effects, the potential impacts of our tax policy. of our trade policy, of our deregulatory policy, of repealing Obamacare, which, by the way, even the Congressional Budget Office says will have a positive impact on GDP growth. And when you add those things up together, we actually thought we could justify higher than 3%, but we settled on 3 because we thought it was a conservatively defensible number.
Let me ask you about what former Treasury Secretary Larry Summers has been saying. You know, he's been very clear, very adamant. He thinks it's not a good budget. He's going to be the guest this weekend on Wall Street Week. And here's what he said to me. Listen to this.
Director Mulvaney is being dishonest.
What was dishonest about what he said?
Because he's suggesting that we had used the same practice as their practice. They are the first to depart from what the whole big world thinks.
Well, he said you were dishonest.
I haven't seen that quote from Mr. Summers. I don't know Mr. Summers. I know his reputation, and I admire him for that. I can assure you that we have been a lot less aggressive than the Clinton and the Obama administrations that he supported. You go back and you look at President Obama's proposals from early in his term. He was projecting 4% growth for several years, so I'm not really sure where Mr. Summers arrives at that. No, we're entirely comfortable with the economics, with the numbers, with the math behind this budget, and would look forward to having a discussion with him about that.
Is there an area you're willing to negotiate here? What are you willing to give on in order to get the budget passed?
Look, go back to our top-line message. Increase funding on the things the president ran on and won on, and don't increase the deficit this year. If there are other ways to skin that cat, we're more than happy to talk about that. We don't believe that this is the only budget that makes any sense. We believe it is the only one, by the way, in a long time that's looked at the spending through the perspective of the people who pay for it. Right. But if there's other ways to get there, we're happy to talk to Congress about that.
Mick Mulvaney, great to see you. Thanks very much, sir.
Thanks, Maria.
We'll see you soon. Mick Mulvaney.